When my father stood up in court and calmly told the judge that my auto repair shop and my car now belonged to my ex-fiancé, I felt something crack in my chest. He didn't stutter. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look at me. But when the judge adjusted his glasses and asked him one quiet question, everything my father thought he controlled started to unravel. Stick with me. I was sitting alone at the defense table in a small county courthouse in rural Ohio, my hands folded so tight they hurt. I honestly thought this hearing was just about paperwork after my mom passed away. Forms, dates, maybe signatures. I didn't bring a lawyer. I didn't bring notes. I brought grief and trust, and that was my mistake. My name is Mara Holloway. I'm 29, and the shop they were talking about wasn't just a business. It was my life. My mom and I rebuilt Holloway Auto and Body from the ground up. Late nights, grease under our nails, coffee at midnight. That shop kept us alive when my dad checked out years ago. And the truck they mentioned? I paid for it myself, dollar by dollar. I didn't even understand what was happening at first. My father, Gregory Holloway, stood up like this was planned, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. He told the judge I was emotionally unstable, that I couldn't manage my own assets. He said it gently, almost kindly, like he was worried about me. Then he said the words that made my ears ring. He said my shop and my truck should be transferred to Evan Klein. Evan, my ex-fiancé. The man who left 6 months ago without a real reason. The man sitting behind my father, calm, clean, and quiet, like he already owned the place. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to glance my way. He didn't. It was like I wasn't there. Like I was already erased. The judge paused. He looked down at the papers, then up at my father. The room felt smaller. I could hear my own breathing. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a hearing. It was a trap. They brought me here to take everything while I was still drowning in my mom's death. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, realizing that the people who were supposed to protect me had planned this behind my back. And whatever came next, my life had already changed the moment my father chose Evan over his own daughter. The shop was never supposed to be mine. At least, that's what my father always said. He liked to remind me of it whenever he walked past the garage doors and saw my name on the paperwork. To him, Holloway Auto and Body was still his, even though he hadn't turned a wrench there in years. My mom, Denise Holloway, was the one who quietly changed things. She didn't announce it. She didn't argue. One afternoon, years ago, she sat me down at the tiny desk in the back office and slid a folder toward me. Inside were papers with my name on them. The shop, fully transferred. I remember staring at it, confused and scared. She told me the truth then. My father had drained their savings gambling. Again, rent money, emergency money, money meant for the shop. She was tired of living one bad night away from losing everything. Putting the business in my name wasn't a gift. It was protection. I worked harder after that. Longer hours. More responsibility. I learned how to run the front office, handle suppliers, manage payroll, and still get my hands dirty in the bay. The shop became proof that I didn't need rescuing. And that's what my father hated most. Gregory never said it out loud, but I could feel his resentment. The shop stood for independence, and worse, it stood for mine. Every time a customer asked for me instead of him, his jaw tightened. Every success felt like an insult to him. Then Evan came into my life. He was charming in a quiet way. He listened more than he talked. He seemed impressed by the shop, by how I ran things. At first, it felt good to be seen. But looking back, his questions weren't casual. He wanted to know who owned what, how the accounts worked, why my father wasn't listed anywhere. He learned fast. Too fast. He spent time with my dad when I wasn't around. Long talks in the office. Drinks after closing. I told myself it was normal. I told myself I was lucky they got along. But the shop wasn't just a building to them. It was leverage. Control. A way back into something they'd lost. I didn't see it then. I thought the danger was outside, like bad customers or slow months. I didn't understand that the real threat was sitting at my dinner table, smiling, listening, and waiting for the right moment to take what my mother worked so hard to protect. When Evan and I got engaged, everyone said I was lucky. He was calm, polite, and always ready to help. He showed up at the shop with coffee, stayed late when I was tired, and told me he admired how strong I was. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. At first, his questions felt normal. He asked how the shop was doing, how busy we were, and what plans I had for the future. Then the questions changed. He wanted to know whose name was on the shop license, where the title to my truck was kept, what kind of insurance I carried, and who the beneficiaries were. I brushed it off. We were getting married. Sharing details felt natural. My father loved him. That should have been a warning. Gregory pushed the relationship hard, telling me Evan was the kind of man who could take care of things. He invited Evan to meetings I didn't ask for. Suddenly, decisions were being discussed without me. I felt uneasy, but I told myself I was being paranoid. Little things started happening. Papers on my desk were moved. A folder went missing and showed up days later in a different drawer. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. Once, I heard Evan and my father talking about the shop accounts when they thought I was outside. They laughed it off when I stepped in. Evan kept saying we should simplify things. He suggested combining accounts, putting paperwork somewhere safe. He even offered to help organize my files, saying it would reduce my stress. I remember how relieved I felt. I was tired. Running the shop, dealing with family, planning a wedding, it was a lot. He always knew just enough. He knew dates before I mentioned them. He knew which documents mattered. When I asked how he remembered, he smiled and said he paid attention because he cared. Now I know the truth. He wasn't listening because he loved me. He was listening because he was learning. Every question was a test. Every quiet moment was information. I wasn't a partner to him. I was a case study. The worst part isn't that I trusted him. It's that I trusted him while my father watched, encouraged it, and quietly helped him gather the pieces. By the time I realized something was wrong, they already knew my life better than I did. Evan didn't just date me. He studied me, and he did it with my father standing right beside him. My mother's death changed everything. One day she was arguing with a supplier on the phone, and the next she was gone. A stroke. Fast and cruel. I didn't even get to say goodbye. The world didn't stop, but mine did. At the funeral, I felt like I was watching my life from far away. People spoke to me, hugged me, told me I was strong. I don't remember most of it. What I do remember is my father stepping in like he had been waiting for this moment. Gregory handled everything. The service. The calls. The paperwork. He told me not to worry, that he would take care of it. Evan stayed close at first, then slowly pulled back. He wasn't cruel. He was careful. He stood beside my father more than he stood beside me. When I asked him why, he said he didn't want to overwhelm me. I believed him because I wanted peace. My father brought documents to me when I was exhausted. Late nights. Early mornings. He said signing them would make things easier. He said it was just to avoid stress. I didn't read everything. I couldn't. Every word reminded me that my mom wasn't there to explain it anymore. They kept me busy and tired. Decisions were made quickly. Too quickly. When I asked questions, I was told not to push myself. That grief made people confused. That I should trust my family. Looking back, I see how my pain was used against me. Every tear became proof that I wasn't thinking clearly. Every pause became a reason to move ahead without me. The first real warning came weeks later, when I got a notice in the mail about a probate hearing. The date was close. Way too close. I asked my father about it, and he brushed it off, saying it was routine and already handled. But something felt wrong. My mother had been careful with everything. She didn't rush legal matters. She planned. The speed didn't make sense. That's when I realized this wasn't just about grief or support. The rules had changed the moment my mother died. The people around me weren't protecting me. They were managing me. I didn't know yet what they were planning, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was happening behind my back had started the moment my mom was gone, and it was moving faster than it ever should have. After the judge called a short recess, a woman in a gray suit approached me and said she was the court-appointed attorney. Her voice was calm, steady, nothing like the storm in my head. She asked me to follow her into a small side room. I remember the hum of the lights and how cold the chair felt when I sat down. She placed a document on the table between us. It said that months earlier, I had willingly transferred ownership of my auto repair shop and my truck to Evan. The paper was notarized. Dated. Official. At first, I couldn't even speak. Then I told her the truth in a quiet voice. I said I never signed that. She slid the page closer. "Is this your signature?" she asked. I stared at it. The letters were shaped like mine. The curve of the M. The long tail at the end. But something was wrong. It felt stiff. Careful. Like someone copying me instead of being me. "That's not how I sign," I said. My hands were steady when I spoke. I surprised myself. The attorney didn't argue. She didn't rush. She just nodded and started asking questions. Where did I usually keep my documents? Who had access to them? Had anyone asked me to sign papers while I was grieving? I answered slowly, thoughtfully. For the first time since my mother died, I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. Something inside me had gone quiet. She explained that the document was the foundation of the entire case. If it was false, everything else fell apart. She also explained that forged signatures were more common than people think, especially during probate. That word stuck with me. Forged. Back in the courtroom, I didn't look at my father or Evan. I watched. I listened. I noticed how Evan avoided eye contact when the judge mentioned the document. I noticed how my father spoke too quickly, like he was trying to stay ahead of the truth. I stopped reacting to them. No more anger. No more shock. I started observing. They thought the paper ended the story. They thought ink and a stamp could erase years of work and trust. But I knew something they didn't. I knew I never signed my life away. And for the first time since walking into that courthouse, I understood that this wasn't over. It was just finally clear where the lie was, and once you see a lie that clearly, you can start pulling it apart piece by piece. That night, after court, I went back to the shop alone. The place smelled like oil and metal, the same way it always had. It felt steady, familiar. I needed that. I locked the door behind me and stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet. My mother used to say one thing over and over. Always keep a copy. She didn't trust luck, and she didn't trust people who rushed paperwork. Taxes, invoices, contracts, everything had a backup. Sometimes, too. I went into the small office in the back and pulled out the old fireproof box from under her desk. I hadn't opened it since she died. My hands shook when I turned the key. Inside were folders stacked neatly, just the way she liked them. That's where I found her personal ledger. It wasn't fancy. Just a notebook with dates, names, and short notes written in my mom's tight handwriting. I flipped through pages slowly. There were entries about the shop, bills, and then things that made my stomach drop. Notes about my father asking for money again. Notes about pressure. Notes about papers G wants signed. Then I found the answering machine. It was old, dusty, and pushed to the side, something no one had touched in years. I pressed play, not even sure it worked. My mother's voice filled the room. Calm, but tired. She was talking to someone, maybe a friend, maybe a lawyer. She said Gregory was trying to force her to sign documents she didn't agree with. She said he practiced copying Mara's signature. She said she was scared of what he might do if she said no. I sat on the floor and listened to that message twice. I didn't cry. I felt cold. Heavy. This wasn't proof yet. Not in a way that could win a case. But it was truth. And it was my mother's voice saying the things I had only started to suspect. My father forgot something important. He forgot that my mom planned for everything. He forgot that she didn't leave loose ends. He thought once she was gone, her knowledge was gone too. He was wrong. I carefully put everything back, making copies of what I could. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. This wasn't about emotion anymore. This was about timing. For the first time since my mom died, I felt like she was still standing beside me, quiet and steady, leaving me the pieces I would need when the moment was right. Evan got careless after the first court date. I think he believed the worst was over. The papers were filed, the story was set, and I was supposed to be quiet and broken. That's when he made his mistake. A week later, I heard from Cal Porter, one of our longtime suppliers. Cal had worked with my mom for years and still called the shop even when things were slow. He asked me, confused, why Evan had contacted him about reopening Holloway Auto and Body under a new name. That alone was strange. Ownership was frozen. Nothing should have been moving forward. Cal told me Evan spoke like he already owned the place. He asked about pricing, delivery schedules, and old account balances. Then Cal said something that made my chest tighten. Evan mentioned a parts delay from last spring and complained about a credit issue tied to a repair job my mom handled personally. That information was never public. It was in our internal records. Evan shouldn't have known about it unless he had access before the supposed transfer date. I thanked Cal and asked him to write down exactly what Evan said, and when he said it, Cal didn't hesitate. He said something about the situation feeling wrong, and that my mom wouldn't have liked it. I didn't confront Evan. I didn't warn him. I just listened. A few days later, I saw filings that showed Evan had tried to reopen the shop under his own name. The dates didn't line up. He was acting like the transfer had happened earlier than the document claimed. That gap mattered. He also slipped in conversation. When we ran into each other outside the courthouse, he mentioned an invoice I hadn't touched since before my mom died. He smiled when he said it, like he was being helpful. I smiled back and said nothing. Every word he spoke gave me more than he realized. This wasn't about revenge in a loud way. It was about letting him reveal himself. Overconfidence does that to people. It makes them forget timelines. Makes them talk too much. Evan thought I was out of the picture. He thought grief had made me weak. What he didn't understand was that I had stopped reacting. I was collecting. By the time he realized his mistake, it would be too late. The truth doesn't rush. It waits. And Evan was walking straight into it, one careless detail at a time. The second court date felt heavier than the first. I walked into the room with my attorney beside me, papers in hand, my stomach tight but my mind sharper than it had been before. Gregory was already there, sitting tall, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Evan was next to him, calm, smug, confident. I hated that look. Gregory started talking immediately. He painted me as unstable, unpredictable, someone who couldn't handle my own business or finances. He told the judge I was too emotional to make decisions, that I wasn't thinking clearly. He even hinted that my grief after my mother's death had made me reckless. I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed quiet. My attorney gave me a small, reassuring nod. Then we began. We presented the ledger first. I handed it over, page by page. Every note my mom had made about payments, accounts, and Gregory's pressure was there. Every line a reminder that the shop had always been under careful management. I watched the judge read, frown, and pause. The ledger spoke louder than anyone in the room. Next came the voicemail from the answering machine. My mom's voice echoed in the quiet courtroom. Calm, steady, but firm. She spoke about Gregory pressuring her and even forging signatures. You could feel the room shift. Even Evan's face twitched slightly when he realized someone else knew what really happened. Finally, the supplier testimony. Cal Porter stepped up and calmly explained how Evan had asked questions he couldn't possibly know unless he had seen internal records before the supposed transfer date. The judge listened, scribbling notes, clearly paying attention for the first time. Then came the questions. They were small at first, polite, but they grew sharper. Why is the notarization dated this way? The judge asked. Why was the notary's license expired at the time? How could these dates match if internal records say otherwise? Gregory stumbled, tried to explain, but his voice lost confidence with every question. Evan shifted uncomfortably, silent now. The power I had felt stolen from me started to creep back into my hands. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smirk. I just watched. Observed. The momentum was changing. Every lie and assumption my father and Evan had relied on was now being questioned. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't the victim in the room. I was the one with truth on my side. And the shift was unstoppable. The moment came quietly, but it hit harder than anything before. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking directly at my father. "Mr. Holloway," he said slowly, "can you explain why the notary on this document was expired at the time it was notarized? And why this signature matches your daughter's but also appears altered?" Gregory's confident mask slipped. His hands twitched on the table. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again. Words came out wrong, stumbling, weak. He glanced at Evan, hoping for backup, but Evan stayed still, eyes wide, caught off guard. I don't," Gregory began, then paused, flustered. He stammered, and the room seemed to grow colder. I could feel the tension shift, like the air was finally moving in my direction. Evan tried to jump in. "Your Honor, Silence, the judge said sharply. No interruptions. The judge turned back to Gregory. Every question cut deeper, every pause in his answers making the truth more visible. He couldn't explain the dates, the notarization, or why the signature looked forged. It was all unraveling before him, and the courtroom was holding its breath. Finally, the judge spoke. "Given the discrepancies and the possibility of forgery, I am ordering an immediate investigation for fraud and perjury. Ownership of Holloway Auto and Body and the associated assets is frozen until this matter is resolved. Gregory Holloway, you are removed as executor of your late wife's estate effective immediately." The words felt heavy in the room, but not in a way that made me want to cheer. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. I felt clarity, like fog lifting after years of confusion. The betrayal that had been hidden in smiles, documents, and careful manipulation was finally visible to everyone. I looked at my father. His face was pale, angry, and defeated. Evan looked like he was calculating his next move, but couldn't find one that worked. The truth had cut through their plans faster than any anger or tears could have. I sat quietly, listening to the murmurs in the courtroom. I didn't need applause. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was right. The papers, the ledger, the voicemail, the supplier testimony, they had spoken louder than any words could. For the first time in months, I felt weight lifting. Not victory, not revenge, but something steadier. I felt clear. Everything that had been stolen from me, every secret plan and lie, was now visible to everyone, and the people who thought they controlled my life couldn't hide behind anything anymore. Months passed, and the world slowly settled back into a rhythm I could finally breathe in. The charges were filed: fraud, perjury, and forgery. I didn't watch the headlines or read every detail. I didn't need to. The law was doing what it should, and that was enough. Evan disappeared. I heard rumors, whispers through suppliers and a few old friends. No calls, no messages, no explanations. He simply vanished as quietly as he had entered my life, leaving the chaos behind. I didn't feel relief or anger. I felt nothing that resembled excitement. It was emptiness, yes, but also a strange kind of freedom. Gregory avoided me entirely. I saw him once at a distance, standing outside the courthouse, trying to look normal, but his eyes didn't meet mine. I didn't want them to. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted space to rebuild what was mine without watching people pretend they had power over it. The shop reopened under my control. Walking through the bay for the first time alone, I could feel the weight of months of fear and betrayal lifting, layer by layer. Every tool, every workbench, every oil-stained floorboard reminded me of the life my mother and I had built together. It wasn't just a business. It was history. It was love. It was proof that we had survived, even when the people closest to us tried to take everything away. I closed up for the day, turning off the lights and locking the doors. Standing in the empty shop, I realized something important. Revenge wasn't about destruction or watching others fall. It wasn't about showing anyone that I could win. The real victory was reclaiming what had always been mine: my name, my work, and my mother's trust. I ran my hands over the counters, over the ledger she had kept, and I felt her presence. Quiet, steady guiding. I didn't need to celebrate or gloat. That would have felt hollow. The satisfaction came from knowing that integrity and patience had carried me through, that I hadn't stooped to anger or malice, and that I could now continue the work my mother had started. I took a deep breath and walked out into the parking lot. The sun was dipping low, painting the sky with soft colors. The shop, the truck, and my life were back where they belonged. I had faced betrayal and manipulation, but I had walked through it with quiet strength. And for the first time in a long time, I felt fully myself again. This story shows how careful documentation, observation, and patience can protect your rights and assets. Always keep copies of important papers, track financial records, and seek legal guidance when needed. Stand up calmly, gather evidence, and don't let emotional manipulation take control of your life. Protect what's yours wisely.